And now we have formal said commands with spell change verbs. So here's the thing. In the first video, we looked at just regular verbs, attempting to convert them pretty simply into formal said commands. It shouldn't have been any big thing for you. So formal said commands, regular verbs. And then we looked at formal said commands, following all the steps, not forgetting any of them, with stem change verbs. Remember that I said with stem change, not this stuff, stem change, prior video, you just have to know, memorize which verbs are stem change versus which verbs are not stem change, so that you know that it's an E to IE stem change, or O to UE, or E to I, or whatever. And then we have another category, which is what we have at hand right now, which are spell change verbs. Just in case you see it called something else, whether it be in any materials or online or this or that or whatever, remember that spell change verbs are a completely different category. They sometimes are called spell change verbs. Sometimes they're called spelling change verbs, and sometimes they're called spell changing verbs. Whether you see it as spell change verbs, spelling change verbs, or spell changing verbs, it's all the same stuff, which is what we have up here behind us. So underneath spell change verbs, there are two different kinds of spell change verbs. We're going to look at these examples that I have behind me, but I have potentially good news for you. Well, it depends on how much you remember from a lower level Spanish class, but it could be good news. The bad news that I had for you with the last kind, stem change verbs, is I said you just had to memorize what verbs are stem change and what kind of stem change verbs they are. But with spell change verbs, something that is kind of like a little trick or a cheat sheet kind of thing to do is, this is where I say it could be good news for you, or you may say, well, that didn't help me at all. If you remember what the yo conjugation of a verb is, and there is an unexpected G or Z, you know that you have a spell change verb on your hands. So instead of being like stem change verbs where you just have to memorize that that verb happens to be a stem change verb and then what kind of stem change verb it is, spell change verbs, you might have a little bit of an in. So if you have a verb and you want to go to step one of creating a formal said command, and you get to the yo conjugation of the present tense, and you realize, like I said a few seconds ago, you realize that you have some crazy G or Z that popped up unexpectedly. Like you look at the verb in the infinitive form and there's no G or no Z, but then all of a sudden you go to the yo conjugation of the present tense and there's a G or a Z that popped up out of nowhere, then you know that you have a spell change verb on your hands, and that will work every single time. So if you can get to the yo conjugation of the present tense of a verb and you see some crazy G or Z that you didn't expect, then you don't have to memorize what verbs are spell change verbs. You can just wait till you get to the yo box of the present tense or the yo conjugation of the present tense, and if there's G or Z that you didn't expect, then you know it's a spell change verb. Whenever we're talking about formal said commands, making the distinction between what kind of verb it is, it will maybe not seem that important to you, but we're laying the foundation for things that are coming up later, and it will be so critically important to your success, whether it's understanding or whether it's your grade. It will be so critically important to your success being able to distinguish or differentiate regular verbs, stem change verbs, spell change verbs, this stuff, Kargar, Zar, etc. For what? Maybe not so importantly for formal set commands, but for things that I mentioned in the first video and the couple reasons for which I said you can't forget this stuff because it's going to come back over and over and over again. So where it will be most important for us to remember the difference between these different categories of regular, step change, spell change, Kargar, etc., will be whenever this stuff comes back to haunt us and it becomes the basis of two informal commands and this thing that I mentioned before called the subjunctive. So right now, don't worry about two informal commands or the subjunctive that might be coming up later, that is coming up later. But please know that making the distinction in your head between what is regular, what is step change, what is spell change, and other different categories, go ahead and make that distinction now because it's important and it will continue to be important in several other different things that we're going to do that for which this will be the basis, or at least play some part in it. So moving along to now spell change. Don't let yourself get confused between stem change and spell change. So spell change verbs, we already said, if you go to the yo conjugation of the present tense, there's some crazy G, crazy Z, is going to be a spell change verb that you have on your hands. So these are just a few examples, some of the most common examples. I could write a bazillion up on the board, but the verb tener happens to be a spell change verb. Maybe you've memorized that it's a spell change verb, or maybe you just simply know how to get to the step one to make a formal usted command, which is the yo conjugation of the present tense, and you remember that the verb tener in its infinitive didn't have a G, but then all of a sudden you go to tener in the yo conjugation of the present tense, and there's some crazy G there. It's tengo. And so just by seeing that unexpected G, what do you know? You know that you have a spell change verb on your hands. And that distinction of what categorization it is will be important, if not now, definitely later with future things that we will be doing. So remember, we're making formal usted commands. We want to, for whatever reason, make a formal usted command with the verb tener. Remember that the verb tener means to have. And I'm going to never, ever, ever skip any of my steps. Ever, ever, ever. So I take it back to the yo conjugation of the present tense, and I get tengo, T-E-N-G-O. Then I do step number 2, which is drop the O, and I get this. T-E-N-G. And then I take it to step number 3, which actually makes our formal usted command for us, and I add the opposite ending. Since we have an ER verb, our opposite ending would be the letter A that we would attach to the end, and so that right there is our formal usted command with the spell change verb tener. So we have tenga, tenga, T-E-N-G-A. Remember that if I wanted to negate that command, all I would have to do would be to put the word no in front of it. So I can make an affirmative formal usted command to somebody and say, like, here, have this, right? Like, tenga. Or I can say, no, wait, don't have cake, have cookies. No tenga, right? So all I have to do is put a no to make the negative command. Then we have the verb hacer, which can obviously mean to do or to make. So the verb hacer, to do or to make, maybe I haven't memorized that it is a spell change verb, but maybe I do know how to take it to the yo conjugation of the present tense. So I take it to the yo conjugation of the present tense and I get hago. Where did that G come from? Who knows? That's just what it is in the yo conjugation of the present tense. And that's how I know that I have a spell change verb on my hand, because there's an unexpected G or Z. So my yo conjugation, step 1, not going to skip any steps. If you notice in the other video with the stem change verbs, if we skipped our steps, we wouldn't have been accounting for the stem changes that occurred, E to IE or whatever. And in this, if we don't take it back to the yo conjugation of the present tense, then we're missing out on this G that we've seen so far that is necessary, and we wouldn't be accounting for it. So first step, yo box present tense or yo conjugation of the present tense, hago, H-A-G-O. Then step number 2, I drop the O, which is what I have done here. Then step number 3, I add opposite endings. Since hacer is an ER verb, my opposite ending in order to make the formal usted command would be the letter A. So my formal usted command for the verb hacer, to do or to make, is haga, haga, H-A-G-A. Once again, I remind you that if I wanted to make, instead of the affirmative command, make me a cake, if I wanted to say no, don't make me a cake, and make a negative command, the aga doesn't change. All I have to do is add the word no in the front. So my affirmative command, aga. My negative command, no aga. And then the last example I have where we have this crazy G that pops up out of nowhere is the verb venir, to come, like come in or come over or whatever, is venir, but I could put plenty more up on the board. For example, the verb salir, salir, to leave or to go out, when we take it to the yo conjugation of the present tense, it's salgo, salgo, S-A-L-G-O. Oh, there's a crazy G there. What does that tell us? It tells us that it's a spell change verb, and we would follow all the steps that we're following right now. So are these the only examples? No, of course not. So to go to our last example where we see an unexpected G, we have the verb venir, to come or to come over, and we take it to step 1, yo conjugation of the present tense, and we get V-E-N-G-O. We see that weird G there that we didn't expect, so we know that it is a spell change verb. And this V-E-N-G-O, for our step number 2, we would just drop that O, like I did right here, and then to form our formal usted command, we would add opposite endings. So since venir is an IR verb, our opposite ending is the letter A, and that is how we get to our formal usted command for the verb venir, venga, venga, V-E-N-G-A, venga. That would be our affirmative command, venga, come or come in. And if I want to say, no, never mind, don't come in, I want to make a negative command, please remember that your verb will stay the same. It's still going to be venga, but we're just going to add the word no to make it negative, no venga. Then the last example I have for you is another category of spell change verbs. I'm sure you guys can see already what kind of verbs we're talking about. I have been saying this whole time that if you take a verb to its yo conjugation of the present tense and you see an unexpected G or Z, then you know that you have a spell change verb on your hands. Well, we've seen all these examples with G's, but we haven't seen an example with a Z yet, and this is the most common. For most people learning Spanish, this is the only one that you're going to see. There is a second one that I have seen in some Spanish curriculum, but this is, if you don't know any other ones that fit into this category, at least know this one. I'll mention the other one whenever we get to this example. It follows the same pattern as all this stuff with the crazy G that appeared, but now it's just a crazy Z. So, conocer, remember, is one of the 2 ways to say to know. Remember that in Spanish we have saber and conocer. So saber is to know, like facts, stuff, information, and conocer generally means to know someone or to know people. So we have the verb conocer, it can mean to know or to get to know, and maybe I have memorized that is a spell change verb where there's going to be an unexpected Z. Maybe I haven't, but maybe I know how to get to step 1. So I take it to the yo conjugation of the present tense, and I say, whoa, where did that Z come from? I must have a spell change verb on my hands. The yo conjugation of conocer in the present tense is conozco, conozco, and it's spelled C-O-N-O-Z-C-O. Then we take it to step 2, and we basically just do what? drop the O that we found right here. And then step 3 is all about adding those opposite endings. And step 3 formulates our formal usted command for us. So step 3, since it was an ER verb, our opposite ending that we would need to add would be the letter A, which I have already done. And so now we have our formal usted command with the verb conocer, to know someone or to get to know. And it is pronounced conozca, conozca. And it's spelled Conozca, conozca. Remember for the last time in this video that for formal usted commands, whenever you have the affirmative versus when you have a negative, that your verb doesn't change. The spelling of your verb, conjugation of your verb doesn't change. All you do is add the word know in the front. So know or get to know, conozca, don't know or don't get to know that person, that's the bad person over there, whatever, it will be no conozca. So that is spell change verbs or spelling change verbs or spell changing verbs. And the big thing to remember with this type of verbs, with formal usted commands, and then with other things coming up later on in your language acquisition process, the big thing to remember is that we don't skip any steps. It is important to know what category of verbs this falls under. These are spell change verbs. And we remind ourselves that there's a little trick. If we have a verb and we take it to the yo conjugation of the present tense, and there is a G or a Z that pops out of nowhere, then we know that we have a spell change verb on our hands. There are other categories of verbs that we need to talk about in with formal usted commands that once again are going to pop up in other things that we're going to do, like informal to commands and this thing called the subjunctive later on in you learning Spanish. So the next video will be about other kinds of formal usted command verb categories.